Morning, this is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Tuesday, February 10th, 2026. It's 10:15 a.m. And we are here to hear about the housing initiative that the Agency of Human Services and specifically DCF is proposing for FY27. Lots of moving parts, so we're glad you can come back and talk to us. I think you were up in Human Services last week.
Yes.
So you've already had a run through and we look forward to hearing what you have to say, and I'm sure we'll have questions. So please take it away.
Great. We'll just introduce ourselves.
For the record, Megan Smeaton, Financial Director, DCF.
And I'm Sandy Hoffman, Interim Commissioner for DCF. And we have all the AHS folks here because it is an agency initiative. It's not just DCF. DCF is holding the budget. But as we get into things that are specific to different departments, or the Secretary's office will ask them to join.
Perfect. That sounds great. Thank you.
So just a high-level overview is that this is going to be a phased approach over a few years. We're hoping to build a better future to serve clients and communities in a way that's sustainable with better outcomes. We're planning to invest in additional shelter capacity and services and to modify the use of hotels and motels during the transition period. We want to better connect people to services, and we want to leverage programs and provide alternative housing options. We want to drive system change for how the community partners, the community action agencies, shelter providers, municipalities, mental health providers, substance use providers, aging and care providers strategize and plan for their community needs together. And then we have the budget components. Can you walk through those?
Yes. So just going back to the previous page for a second, you have a little
Photograph.
bar chart. And that's just to represent kind of where you're trying to go.
Yes, the shift in where the services will be provided. So you can see there's not a decline in housing options. It's just different. It looks
Right.
different.
So reduction, the goal is a reduction in hotel, motel, GA housing,
As it's
and an increase in shelter and adverse weather. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to, so in the shelter capacity, will you be speaking to how many of those shelters will actually come online in the coming year?
What we hope will come online, yes.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Tom.
So given the way the world has gone for the last going on 6 years now, and shelters have made this roaring comeback of need, just based on the sheer numbers of folks that we're dealing with here. But for many, many years, investing in shelters wasn't viewed as, I mean, it's crisis of the instant in many, many ways, and it's been a long instant. And I know we're trying to invest as much money as possible in housing, but I feel like we're losing momentum on providing the housing that we would move people from shelters into a little bit. And I'm just curious to know what the thought is long term in terms of investing more money in housing that would, whatever that's defined to be, for people coming out of homelessness, because I think there's been a gap is growing between what kind of housing would be sufficient for the state's responsibility to help people have stable housing, and what we're going to hear today is going to be. Just want to throw that out there now before we get into this.
Is that for everyone to think about? Because I don't know that I can speak to what housing will come online in a few years. I can talk about what AHS hopes to do to help those who are unhoused now in the next few years.
I just want to point out that we have been trying to avoid the use of shelters for many, many years because they're so temporary and they don't solve the problem that we're trying to solve. So by using shelters, we're really saying that we can only provide temporary solutions, 80 days a year kind of thing. And so I just want to lay that out there because we're investing so much money in shelters. And again, I admit and will, accept the fact that in the crisis of the instant, shelters are better than nothing. But in terms of long-term investments, not much more. So I just want to lay that out, and that's the context I'm going to hear that your testimony today.
So the next slide. This is a comparison of budgets that we put together that I think is helpful to sort of show the moving pieces in terms of following the dollars. So we have one.
Here you go. But it looks nice.
It's a great slide.
Somebody email that to Autumn so we can get a copy.
It's in a different location.
Just a second. The presentation you have goes from the slide that you just had to additional shelter capacity, $6 million combined with $5 million carried forward. What's the date? February 9th.
This morning, there should have been some that were sent this morning.
I sent this last night.
Okay, can you send this morning's?
I'll send.
See, we're constantly enhancing things.
Continuous improvement.
It's okay. Work, okay.
It's okay.
Where would this be coming from?
It's going to come from Nellie.
I'll have to send you a little while from the screen sharing right now.
So you don't have anything on it for this?
I have
What you gave us, which is from yesterday.
Stop screen sharing.
Yeah, can you share yours?
Sure.
Okay, we're gonna switch you sharing, so Nellie can send it to you. and
Great,
then
then
we'll
we'll get through it. I did see, just briefly, and I saw some little chart that was in an email that somebody sent that looks similar to that, but probably has different numbers of historic. And I would like to see the breakout. There's a $32 million line item, doing this from memory, because I saw it for a second and a half back there, that included HOP and shelters, and it had like a bunch of stuff in it, but I would like to see how that's broken out, because some of that shelter funding and some of it is financial support of people and wraparound services. Those are different things to us. One is bricks and mortar or whatever.
I think we're going to do that for the state fiscal year, the proposal, we're going to break it out.
Okay.
For what? So question.
If Lily has a response to what I was asking.
Any for the base appropriation, sorry, really sort of interrupt their box and I'm not. Are you asking about the 31?
Yes.
So that's in the base appropriation, that is not bricks and mortar. That is funding under the Housing Opportunity Grant Program for operating funds and services in the community. So that does not include the significant investment rate acquisition. It is, again, the Housing Opportunity Grant Program, which is an umbrella continuum of services for people experiencing at-risk of homelessness. So it includes shelter funding for operations, the direct financial assistance, the housing-based management, so that be like navigation,
Yeah.
if you're experiencing homelessness, as well as a small amount of homelessness prevention. We fund the homeless management information system. And so that's all done under one continuum program, because a lot of these providers perform those array of services, right? So Captain Community Action, they run shelter capacity, they also provide a significant amount of housing-based management to people who are not necessarily in their shelters.
Yes.
And they're available.
So is it possible to break out within HOP what are direct services to clients and what is shelter operations? Like costs to run the shelters, which is, I assume, the operations are. Is it
Yeah.
possible to break that out?
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be really helpful to see that. I just needed to ask it the right way. Thank you.
And I just sent Representative
Yes.
Lily.
And I just printed it out and.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay.
Our board summary, but you can also do
Yep.
just a smaller, amount for you as well.
Yeah. Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. Go ahead. We'll look at this until we get our.
Yes, this is, it's sort of a high level depiction of the changes from the 26 budget as passed versus our proposed GovRec, state fiscal year 27 budget. And we broke it out between one-time and base appropriations, as we're utilizing them somewhat differently, between the two state fiscal years. So we've been funding emergency housing, which is the hotel motel program, with one-time funding, as well as an $8 million base appropriation for some time now. And so, we're representing that as a decrease next year for the emergency housing and the one-time appropriation and the base, but then you'll see significant increases elsewhere in the budget, for different types of shelter supports. And so we did send this in an email, as you mentioned, but if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to talk through them now, or we're going to walk through each of the line items. As we go.
Yeah, walk through the line.
Yeah.
Good, yeah.
Okay, so for additional shelter capacity, we want to combine the 5 million carry forward to create shelters. So that's an 11 million total. So 6 million plus the 5 carried forward. And then we're hoping for 6 additional shelters serving approximately 200 households. They would be regionally based on need, approximately 40 households in each shelter. Programming would be determined by need, and there would be mental health services provided in shelters. 250,000 is set for that.
And do you have locations identified? How far along are you in doing this?
I wonder if you want to switch.
It's Department of Mental Health, in terms of the line item for the mental health services in shelters. We were planning to start with shelter providers, just given the amount of people who are without housing in those areas. And then hopefully expand that over time, so that 250 is representative of starting those specific areas first in the next minute.
That's the mental health side, but the shelters look
Yeah.
like it's
With the
Actual-
with the exception of rest.
6 locations, right?
I'm gonna have Lily and Megan switch places.
We can just add more chairs to the front too, if that's really easier.
You're gonna have a lot of questions for Lily.
You just have a chair.
We have done preliminary analysis on locations. Over the past few years, we've also worked really successfully with Vermont Housing and Conservation Board to fund the shelters that we've started again in the past few years. If we're able to move forward with this, we would adjust a process slightly where we would do more targeted outreach in our notice of funding. We've had some communities that have just had more internal capacity to respond to some of these funding opportunities. And if we were able to move forward here, we would work slightly differently to do some targeted outreach in some of the communities where we're just not necessarily seeing the capacity that we want. And again, we have some of those preliminarily identified, but are continuing to work on looking at the data that we have. We have a number of shelter projects, for instance, that are coming online next year. We want to make sure we're kind of using the latest data when we would target that notice of funding.
So you're trying to put these around the state. And you have some coming so that there's access for people. But you haven't identified these specific 6 at this point.
And I think this is where it's a little bit relative to depending on where we end up with this proposal, because depending on how it's received, that might change which types of shelter or areas that we prioritize.
So they each hold house 40 households. Go ahead.
I don't recall hearing this when I was at the Aging Services. Is there transportation built into the budget so that someone living in an adjacent community, but not in that community, can actually get there? And I'm thinking about the person who tried to walk from Shelburne to Burlington to the cold weather shelter who died. And I just didn't know if transportation that, there would be coordination around that.
So I can speak to what we're doing currently. So currently in the Housing Opportunity Grant Program, transportation is not a generally allowable cost. And some of this has to do with just like prioritizing the funds that we have to make sure that these shelters are adequately staffed and resourced. For the extreme cold weather shelter program, transportation was an allowable request or eligible expense as part of that notice of funding. And so those shelters were able to build transportation into that budget to meet that need. It is not something that we currently support through the Housing Opportunity Grant Program.
Next, we have the recovery-oriented shelter. That's the maintenance of a 12-bed shelter in Burlington with a targeted opening in March of this year. And then investment in a potential third recovery-oriented shelter, which would be jointly administered by VDH. There's one in Barry too.
So there's an existing one in Barry, and you're about to open Burlington. The third one is TBD location. Don't have one yet.
Right.
The total number of beds would be,
In the new,
well, I can't remember what varies.
13.
Yep, 13,
And the new one would have how many?
12.
12.
After Burlington, the one after Burlington. So it would be 37 total.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think we would imagine a roughly similar size, but that would depend on, the space that they're able to access.
Okay, so how, it says investment in potential third recovery. And you have 1.2 million for that. And so how far along are you in your thinking about that? Has you sent anything out for notice of funding? Or no, it's just,
No, we will be starting with Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity funding of that project with one-time funds. They're opening in March and they have that grant agreement in place. We have not done a notice of funding for the third.
So how much money, say you got 1.2 million for recovery shelter, what proportion of that would be for operations?
So I would say approximately 3/4 would go to maintain operations of the recovery-oriented shelter in Burlington. And then I think the remaining is where we would want to be putting out an opportunity, and it would be somewhat dependent on what space they have access to in terms of, do they need significant renovations, or would they be able to identify a space and just jump into operations? And that would probably determine at what point during next year they could start. I don't think we anticipate that they would be able to start the whole year, just given the timing that we need to make sure we go through the budget process before we could issue a notice of funding for this.
So roughly 900,000 for Burlington, roughly 300,000 for the facility.
Yes.
So the new shelter purchase, or again, out of the 300K, how much would be for operations and how much would be for acquiring the facility?
I think that's where, again, we would be flexible to see what the community could provide. Our shelters currently have a mix of both owned spaces and leased spaces. So I think, again, we would be working with our community providers to see what they could bring online relatively
So
quickly.
obviously, if it's leased, and lease would be part of the operation.
Yes, exactly.
Owned it, then you
Right.
pay taxes or something.
Right.
So I want to, it sounds like that third option, that third recovery shelter, would not really come online because 25% of the 1.2 million wouldn't be enough to actually establish a shelter and then operate it for a significant length of time. Is that right?
I think it would depend on the timing within the year. I will say that operational costs are much higher in Burlington than they are in the rest of the state when you look at both rent and staff costs. So for instance, the shelter in Barry operates for approximately half of what the shelter in Burlington would. So I think that's another determinant when you look at some of the other communities that might be able to sustain something like this based on their other programming. We would probably anticipate lower operational costs in Burlington. We would anticipate lower operational costs in Burlington. But yes, it might not, it is unlikely to be the whole year.
What built into your budget is sustaining Bear.
That is in our existing HOP base budget as well as in the health department's base budget.
So Burlington would be two, that's coming on in March and have to be funded through it.
No, the Burlington project, this 1.2 is part of the housing initiative, which could then become base, but it's not in, it's in this line item. It's the 1.2. Whereas the Berry shelters just in the other
It's
HOP.
already operating, but this, if this one is starting in March of 2026, you're gonna have to pay for it in 2027. So you're saying their operating costs are included in the FY 27 housing initiative, they're part of it?
The operational costs for state fiscal year 26 are one-time funds.
Right.
And so the operational cost for 27 is incorporated in this 1.2 million.
Is that out of the current budget time or is that?
This
I
would
make sure I
be,
understand.
this would be base. But if I just take a step back and this is where maybe I'll tag in Megan. It was, yes, I think, you know, what we tried to do, and maybe for some people this is clear, for some people it's confusing, right? We tried to put things that had base pressure that into more of their like standard place in the budget. So for instance, other shelter pressures or extreme cold weather shelter, those are just kind of in our base budget. And then we tried to call out some of the newer things as this initiative. And I don't know if that's causing confusion. I don't know where Megan went. Oh,
So yes, we are doing this initiative starting to mark the Western funding. Realize that we're doesn't provide ongoing supports, and so building this into the budget in 27 into our base, this 1.2 million is built into the HOP budget.
So it's part of the HOP budget, and some of it's gonna go to maintenance of Burlington, and some of it's gonna go to an investment to be determined in the third place, maybe. Okay, doesn't feel like it's enough money, that's like, when you staff a shelter, how many staff are in a shelter, do you know?
it depends on the size and the physical layout of the space. I think a general baseline is that for most shelters, again, this varies depending on like the population and the setup, but
Range.
I think you would see like 1 to 2 staff on site all the time. As the shelter gets bigger, that number of staffing is increasing, especially during the day. And so for these shelters, we're seeing 1 to 2 staff on at a time. They are smaller. We are seeing these as slightly higher barrier shelter, right? Because they're for folks who are in recovery. So they have like less of a staffing presence than something that might be more high barrier, but they're also new. And so it's a new model and we're continuing to work through and also make sure that we have services like on site. And so for instance, CVOEO is working with the Howard Center to make sure they have a clinician there. So that also adds to some of the cost of this.
Right, well,
project.
that would make sense to me because we're offering wraparound services, other services to people who are at the shelters. So the staff are equipped or experienced, trained in offering other services and letting what they need to move on to the next place. Okay, let's continue.
Okay, and I think that I failed to mention that we met with community partners, community action, agencies and municipalities, and we talked about what they were seeing and what they needed. And some of the proposal is based on what they said was a definite need. And recovery shelter was one, and then the next one is the medically vulnerable shelters or sheltering. And that would be Dale administered shelter or shelters, and it may serve approximately 60 people. It would include case management, personal care, and skilled nursing. I don't know if you have questions.
So
And Dave,
I'm sorry, I need to go back and ask a simple question. So these are gonna be shelters that are state-run shelters in conjunction with community groups? Or is this going to be like, so in Barry, are you working directly with Good Sam? Or are these now gonna be state shelters?
These are the recovery oriented.
Yeah.
Those are not state
They're
administered.
community-based shelters.
Okay, so you're funding organizations. Okay, I just wanna, it just made it sound like it was a state-owned or state-run or shelter. Thank you. So
Thank you for clarifying.
oh no, Dave had a question. Sorry, I knew somebody did.
Thank you. Just to be clear, is this one shelter that can serve up to 60 people? Or are we trying to embed into the various shelters capacity to serve the medically vulnerable?
I think what's really beautiful is our partners from Dale are here. So Angela Smith, Deputy Commissioner Smith Shang is here from Dale, and you want to come up and talk about this?
You can do it either way. That's fine.
Or you can say there.
It's fine. Yeah, Angela Smith, I think our ideal representative community is that we would have some dedicated shelter capacity for this population to be able to embed the specific services that they need. So ideally having some capacity in the north part of the state and also in the southern part of the state, because we're hearing about the need for the across the state. In this transition time, we're also thinking that we need to better embed services in our current GA emergency housing system, both hotels and motels and shelters. We want to be able to bring more services to people where they're at, but then also build this capacity with a dedicated shelter for this. That's your
Yeah, thank you.
okay.
Go ahead, Dave.
At some point, I don't want to break the flow of your presentation, but at some point, what would help me, I'm trying to follow the dollars and, that I get confused so easily. If you could just help me understand how a homeless person, a husband, a wife, and a child just lost their apartment because their landlord wants to go into short-term rental, no longer renting to them. How would that little family access help? What would it look like for them? When it's good for you to do that, would you help me with that?
Yes, thank you so much.
So then we'll move on to family sheltering. Oh, there's another on this.
All right, then.
Yeah, following what David asked for. When you're talking about medically vulnerable and you're looking at things like skilled nursing, things like that. These are high touch individuals with great needs. Before you get into the families, can you explain a little bit as to how you find them, how you serve them, how do you get them the help in the shelter?
Yeah, and I think again, we can hear from Dale. I mean, so these are folks who are right now just accessing other shelters or general assistance emergency housing and not necessarily always having their needs met. So I don't want to imply that folks can't access shelter right now, but do you want to speak to that?
Right, so they would be coming into the system, the system, in all of the ways that they're trying. Identified on the street or being immediately evicted. They might call the AAA, the Area Agency on Aging, they might call or connect with coordinated entry. It could be identified in a number of different ways. And then we'll have a specific screening process to identify those that meet the criteria for the medically vulnerable shelter. So they could be they could be coming from another shelter where maybe their needs are not meeting that, and we transition to the shelter for medically vulnerable to be able to have more vetted services.
Thank you.
And then family sheltering will be 7.9 million. Utilize family designated hotels across 7 districts, approximately 240 rooms. There would be limited services positions that are in the ESD rate to work in the hotels. It would be a motel coordinator. They leverage services, the leverage services may include hireability, DOL, parent-child centers, Vermont chronic care initiatives, substance use disorder treatment, designated agencies. The authorized stays would be based on need and a case plan, and they would have housing navigators, and those would be community-based.
John has a question.
Not to interrupt, but just to, I assume, we've had designated hotels here over time, we've been using here. With that,
Speak.
yes,
Well,
sorry. That's why.
I know, it's all right. It's just hard. You can't hear it lower. Use your voice.
Use my voice, how's that?
Great, good.
And do that. So, yeah, we've been using hotels here for some time. Here we have a list of those places here. Would you be changing the list of those based on what they would be able to accommodate with family sheltering? Would you have to seek other hotels to serve that initiative?
I think we would want to be strategic about where they were.
That was my next point
Yes.
as well.
Yes, so that we would keep the kids near their school districts would be a primary, that would be one of the reasons we would want them to be safe. I think Miranda is on and she could talk more about the,
I am.
okay.
Good morning. For the record, Miranda Gray, ESD Deputy Commissioner. Apologies for not being with you. I'm a bit under the weather. We would be using our current hotels, and that's approximately, globally, we have about 70 that we work with. Right now, we have 12 designated hotels for families, and this would be adding staffing to try to give it more of a shelter feel, right? Someone that would be helping with the rules and ensuring that there were rules that they have similar into shelters and helping people connect with resources, because we've heard that that continues to be a problem. We have tried to make sure that there are some, but as noted here, we have a lack of hotels in certain areas, one being the Northeast Kingdom, where we haven't been able to achieve this yet, just because if we designated a hotel for families, then we wouldn't have capacity for anybody else. But it is something that we continue to look at how we could bolster, either by having a family designated hotel kind of for sheltering now, or is there desire or the ability, to do family shelter in that community area.
Thank you, because that's another, if I can just follow up with a couple of items here, that's one issue, that's one concern I would have, is just certain places in Vermont, whether it's Northeast Kingdom or maybe Southeast Kingdom, I tease about that a little bit here, but just rural places where we just don't have easy access. Distance is a huge issue. Just to echo what Representative Lilly was sharing here about transportation, getting a family there, all of a sudden, something were to occur, they needed this opportunity here. So I would just encourage all of us to kind of think about the transportation piece of this potential initiative here.
Yeah, I just, the leverage services, like the parent-child centers, I'm wondering, is there money built into the budget then to fund those services? Or is the assumption that they already have the funding that they need to do that? It strikes me that this is an additional responsibility.
Some of these are you, the parent-child center specifically?
Well, yeah.
Are you asking about?
If there's state agencies, I don't know how that works with parent child centers. From my perspective, really struggle to make ends meet and introducing another responsibility and putting them, I mean, they're very close to families, many of the families that would be served through these shelters. And I'm just wondering, is there money built into the budget to support their extra work?
No, the budget does not include additional work. I think some of this is the role that the motel coordinator would play, as Miranda said, in terms of assessing the needs of that array of families at the shelter and then being able to target, are there opportunities to bring folks in or not? So for instance, if they see trends of, oh, we have 24 families here, 90% are not currently employed and looking for work, we could work specifically with higher ability to bring services on site. Or, wow, 90% of the families staying here have kids under 6, that's quite a bit. Maybe we could work with the parent-child center to see if they could do a parent group or how to leverage those resources. So I think that's one of the reasons for the limited service position, to dive in both to see what are the needs of the family and then what are the community resources that could be leveraged, recognizing that there may be challenges depending on the motel and the service provider, but again, the need for that coordination role.
So linking to existing services often, right? Which may create more work for those groups. Were they part of your conversation when you met with people to talk about this whole program? PCCs? We met with PAs were involved, but we met with a parent-child center, but they weren't part of a particular.
Okay. But Dave?
In fairness, some of these families may already be working with community action or parent-child center.
Yeah.
But my question is, should we as policymakers consider asking the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, who likely already have projects in the queue, but to dedicate a certain allocation, a certain portion of their appropriation to pay for the remodeling or construction of shelters that you're envisioning?
So going back to the investments, I think that they would probably argue, and I think we would also point out, not wanting to have an impact on, I think what you brought up earlier, Representative, in terms of their ability to continue to invest in long-term housing options. So I think that is just a dynamic to.
But it wouldn't
To
be
balance.
forever. It would be until the stock that's necessary was built. I'm trying to think in my community. I know some of you may have visited it in Hyde Park, which is adjacent to Morrisville. The Vermont Housing Conservation Board and other funding packages help build the Lamoille Community House, which if you ever get the opportunity, that's when I'm thinking of these things, I'm thinking of something like that, with privacy and high quality and a lot of nice aesthetics, et cetera, to build and promote decency wherever you can. And they did it there, and
Yep.
and I understand it was in the queue for a couple of years, but I'm just trying to think if there's a way during this crisis to leverage some of our already existing, resources, pivot into something like this. Just noodle on that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, again, we really appreciate their partnership and they have done a great job and continue to really help us with a lot of these projects. I think, again, we don't want to necessarily take long-term housing projects offline. And so that's where we have our one-time ask. But of course, that's something that
Sure.
we can follow up
Thank you.
with, and I'm sure
Yep.
they would be happy to come and speak to as well.
I think we have some other people with thoughts, Tom, and then Pip.
Yeah, David, to your point, VHCB does invest money into shelters. It's usually on a project by project basis. The issue with the VHCB and how they handle the money that they use never pays for a whole project, right? They have to work with partners just like you explained in Lamoille. So they do have a commitment, and they've been asked this year after year to make sure that there's a commitment to working with organizations to make sure that shelters are taken care of if a project comes forward that is financially viable, and that responds to a community need. That's kind of their model for it. And so I know that in years past, when asked to take a certain amount of money, they're generally from the property transfer tax, which is being fully funded. Their statutory give is being fully funded this year. They split that between conservation and housing, and then that housing money goes into projects that are either first money in feasibility studies or last money in, and they work with those organizations. So I would imagine that they would be reluctant to say X amount of dollars goes into one specific program. But they have been on the forefront of funding and helping local organizations take care of that. But I understand your question about dedicating a certain amount of money, whether it comes from VHCB's statutory give or whether it comes from any of the one-time money that they've received over the years.
I was chuckling, Madam Chair, because they've always been uncomfortable every year when I suggest this. Keep trying. Sometimes, you never know.
Two for me on this committee.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I don't want to take us down a long and winding road. Lily, I think I'd love to meet with you to talk about ESD staffing vision, and why some shelters will be run by community-based organizations, why we have, as you know, ESD workers at the family shelters. And you know, I'm just raising that as an issue because many of the shelters that exist are in fact run by community-based organizations that have those networks in the community. And so I think that both in human services and in this committee, we raised the question about those 21 positions and what they would be doing and why they should be as ESP folks versus representatives from the organizations that are working directly with many of these folks. So
I would like to respond to it a little bit. I know you don't want to go down a long and winding path, but so these would be still using the hotels and motels, and we would be using them differently. And what we know from the meetings that we've had with community partners is that, and what we've learned is they're not safe currently. And there aren't the same type of rules that there are in the shelters, and there's no presence there of any staff person who could help navigate the system a little bit and make sure that the rules are being adhered to. It makes sense to have an economic services staff person in there. They would administer a program or act as these coordinators. They know the services, they know the partners that they would be connecting them with, and they would help move them through this system. So in our mind, it does make sense, and a deeper conversation probably should happen, but I would include Miranda Gray in that.
All right.
Okay. And then next one is domestic violence. That'd be 500,000. That increases investments to statewide coordination of emergency shelter services to survivors of domestic violence. Average of about 17 households, over 6,000 bed nights. Managed by community providers based on safety needs and shelter capacity, and creates one statewide approach. And then natural disaster, that'd be 292,000. It's currently AHS is providing case management. This will allow greater collaboration with reduced burden on population being served. And it's an average of approximately 10 households or 3,650 bed nights.
They would be located where?
The people?
Yeah.
In motels.
Motels. So I guess I do have a question here. I'm showing my ignorance on here. What happens to the 80 days thing? Are they all limited to 80 days?
No,
That all changes
not for those.
for all the people we've talked about, the
The
families,
families,
the recovery, the medically vulnerable, et cetera. There's not a limit at this point. Is that
Correct.
correct?
For the record, that's correct. However, with the next slide, we'll see, we do know that there is a time limit.
Okay. Thank you.
We're waiting for the next slide. This is the traditional GA with modified eligibility, utilize this temporary overflow, 10 million for that. And this would be a continued safety net for state fiscal year 27. It would serve approximately 327 households. And it would be utilized when shelters aren't available, and there would be modified eligibility.
So the shelters are filled up? Is that why it would be unavailable? Or the only one that's available is in Bennington and I'm in Burlington or something?
Correct.
And tell me more about modified eligibility. What does that mean?
The criteria would be age 65 plus, medically vulnerable, and families that are not able to get into the specific shelters, and pregnant persons.
Write this down. I can't write it.
That's who would be eligible?
Yes,
Could you repeat it again? 65 plus?
medically vulnerable.
Yep.
Families that are not able to get into the specific shelters that we talked about, and pregnant persons.
Domestic violence, same thing.
If they were unable to get into and it was safe.
If I may,
Yes,
Madam
okay.
Chair,
Go ahead, Dave.
could you share with us compared to what we have today, what the differences are? Is there anyone who wouldn't be eligible, who is eligible today?
We can, again, we can provide that crosswalk. Short answer is, everyone who's eligible today will have space to be able to come to the
And thank you. How did you arrive at the 327 number? Is that just a calculation based on the other availability, what might be left over based on current trends?
back into the history on this.
It's just a specific number. I didn't know.
Yeah.
Now, it more aligns to the actual when you consider the number of family households actual and to the other ones that we talked about, domestic violence. So again, it is kind of that balance number of that to get to where we actually are today or have been throughout April to December this past year.
Thank you. And is this just for budgetary planning purposes? Meaning if we ended up at 400, would we say, no, we've passed the 327, you can't get in?
Well, it's important as we think about budget and the planning committee that we do have some predictability. So yes, that would be the ceiling.
They present a budget based on that, but the law wouldn't prohibit John from getting in.
Here's
Or would
328.
28.
You were 328, get in?
I'm just trying to clarify, does that mean once we You
I
know,
think it's what we're saying for the traditional GA, that there would be a cap, much like
Thank
your
you.
current is today.
okay, I'm just trying to understand that.
So, yeah, you raise a good point, Dave, and so I'm wondering, with this whole proposal, how many people are you assuming are homeless?
Well, we go back to the first slide, and maybe we can go back to the first slide, the bar charts. So the bar charts, so we bring that up. The chart at the bottom left, that's the, so these are actuals from last week. Past week, in actual numbers. Here we have the, I'll say traditional GA and shelter capacity across the state. The extreme cold weather, as well as the deep kind of Vermont, really years. And if we look to the right, to the right, this is the proposal. So it's a different mix of that for the past, we are using it.
Right.
And using it more intensively with services.
So I'm still wondering what the assumption is at the beginning of how many homeless people there are in Vermont and how many we're serving.
And the bar chart on the right would show us serving about 25
People, not households.
It's a mix based on the different components, rooms, shelter beds.
Okay, so individuals and households.
That's correct.
Go ahead.
But I'm sorry, I don't ever like starting with but, realistically, given what it takes to, put together some of the shelters, build the capacity that you're talking about, not all of these would become online in FY 27.
So for instance, that family shelter option, that's really, and I think if you note on that slide, we're talking about family sheltering there. That's leveraging the hotel as a transition period of time. And so that's really where, so those, for instance, that idea is because of what you've raised, right? Is that we wouldn't be able to bring that much capacity online with a brick and mortar shelter. And so we see the need for a transition period, leveraging motels, and we're proposing to do that in a different way for that population.
I was just thinking about the recovery and the 6 other shelters, and just overall, there's there's lead time that one needs in order to develop these, and I guess I'm having trouble understanding who will be unhoused essentially next year, and how many people are likely to be. Even if we were working 24/7 to try to get everything off the ground. And I'm not quite sure how we're defining disability. That would be helpful to know. I think the governor's executive order applied to like 400 households, and there are 200 medically vulnerable, 60 people. And I know that you want to embed that capacity within some of the other shelters, but I guess I'm just, I'm trying to put the pieces of this puzzle together in my own head, and it does still strike me that we are going to lose significant capacity in the intervening, in this FY 27. And there are a lot of folks who will not fall into the categories that you mentioned, who would be eligible for the traditional GA. A homeless veteran, for example, able-bodied, but doesn't qualify in your definition of disabled. Anyway, have you done kind of projections, realistic projections about, okay, well, how many people really will we kind of lose? How many people will lose housing under this plan in the coming year?
We have a breakdown that we can send as a follow-up. I don't believe it's in the slide, but we can
It's
share
not.
and that doesn't include, again, I think next year, the anticipation of that 240 is that we're building that capacity and then they would come online. But we can send you category by category a chart that we have as a follow-up. Great.
My question goes back to that, asking about operational costs, but then, thinking about it, folks aren't actually managing places. You're giving grants to nonprofits or designated agencies or whatever that do the work, right? So am I correct?
For the hotels or for the shelters?
Shelters.
Yes, that's correct.
The shelters. So when we ask you something like, what's the operation cost? You can't possibly know because it's their operation costs. Unless they report something to you, which I don't know, if it's any requirement for them to report something to you.
Oh, there. Yes, there is.
So if we're asking impossible questions for things that you don't know about.
We have an annual notice of funding opportunity for our Housing Opportunity Grant Program, which is the primary funding source for the state to support emergency shelters. And so that's where we look at their budgets very line by line. My team does an incredibly thorough job in reviewing those applications. And then we award and they report to us quarterly on their financial spending and then an annual financial budget. So it is, so yes, while we cannot predict exactly what they may be, we do have some historical data and averages that we can give us as a ballpark. But it is correct that some of this would be to be determined once the rubber hits the road.
So it's all in there, and it could be varying based on different organizations, whatever.
Exactly.
Maybe if you use the AI on the whole mass of the thing, you could come up with some averages and what it costs.
Just one clarification, please, back on this particular slide. These are people, either households or individuals, not money. Is that what these tracks? Sorry.
You're correct. It's not money, it's not a money slide.
It's not a money side. These are people and now you're shifting. Okay, thank you. I misunderstood that.
Yeah, didn't have lots of money too. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So we're back we talked at modified eligibility, and you'll send us some more information about that. Right. That would be great.
And then adverse weather. So this would be 3.6 million. It would serve approximately 513 households. Based on historical data, we figure 87 days, and it would be weather dependent.
How are you defining adverse weather for this?
I believe Miranda Gray is on the line. You can talk about the specific weather criteria.
That would be great.
It's consistent with previous weather criteria.
Okay. Did you hear that, Miranda?
I did, thank you. So we would be going back to the adverse weather conditions that we had used pre-pandemic. And so it's a combination of negative 20 degrees or a combination of higher temperature, but with precipitation in the mix. And so it is also variable to location around the state.
The only thing I really understood is they can't come unless it's minus 20 degrees.
Is it,
Or, and I don't,
appreciate the communication here. And again, we're dealing with, there's only so many words in the English language to describe some of this. So adverse weather conditions is the language that we use for the economic services motel-based program to expand capacity at the motels. That has its own definition. So for instance, right now, that's a seasonal operation.
Yeah.
As Miranda mentioned, historically, it operated at that other threshold. This is separate from the extreme cold weather shelter program. which is a separate, I believe it's 1.3 million in a separate line item to expand what we're doing this year, where it's the physical shelters that are operating, as you said, on those coldest nights, with a mandatory activation of -10 degrees Fahrenheit and optional activation at 0.
So the extreme cold weather is the -10, optional at 0. So I don't understand why we have an adverse and an extreme.
I think,
I'm just confused.
yeah, no, and again, right, there's only so many words to describe the
We
weather.
have two different.
Yeah, I think the reason has to do with how we use and can access the resources. So for instance, at the extreme cold weather shelters, many of them could not operate more frequently. They don't have the staff capacity, they don't have the space capacity. So we're trying to layer the resources that we have. And that's why we have different approaches. We would not be able to operate those physical shelters as frequently as we could utilize these hotel rooms as we have done in the past.
Dave?
So I thought though, as we build more shelter capacity, and that would mean there'd be less people in motels. There would still be, meaning there would be motel capacity. That somebody could say there's no room at the inn being the shelter, but now you can go into this hotel. Would we do that? Or would we not? Assuming you set whatever the
Yeah.
temperature is that you end up on. It's cold enough outside, shelters are full, there are available motels because the people, assuming they don't close. Would we say, Dave, you and your family can go there for however long the policy is? Would we do that?
Yes. Right? I mean, that's this.
Yeah,
This is the over.
Up to 327?
Right.
Okay.
and this just would operate more frequently than the extreme cold weather. Because it's a higher temperature threshold. Or lower. Yeah, warmer,
The
yeah,
warmer weather.
yeah.
Thank adverse weather is, but you
Yeah.
said adverse weather started at -20 degrees.
And
I'm
I think
thinking
that
of
was,
changing that.
when he was sick, and it was maybe hard to hear her. She did not say it starts at -20.
Okay, well, I guess that's what we both heard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
So tell us again, what constitutes adverse weather, since we clearly got that wrong.
I believe it starts at 32 degrees, but I will ask Megan to reach out to
Okay.
Brandon to get that. Yeah.
Sorry, I have it in front of me now, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. Dave.
Okay. So temperature, wind chill are less than 20 degrees, or temperatures are less than 32 degrees with a higher than 50% chance of precipitation projected.
Can you repeat that, please?
Yes, of course. So temperatures or wind chill are less than 20 degrees, or temperatures are less than 32 degrees with a higher than 50% chance of precipitation.
Okay, so that's considered adverse weather. That does sound less extreme than the others. That was a -20 that we saw.
Okay, our apologies.
Now we're confused.
Nippy.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, how this system can work if you're in St. Albans and it's gonna be, it falls into that category, but you're in Burlington and maybe you're a degree off and then, Virgins, like I would think that would be very difficult to administer and very difficult for those. I mean, well, anyway, you're talking about motel rooms in this instance, the adverse weather conditions, and I don't know if you would, how easy you could book those on a day-to-day basis. It just seems like an awful lot of work and and to track all of that down. from one community to another?
Or do you use what's at the airport? I mean, how do you decide? That's a good question.
Miranda, do you have anything?
Sorry, can you say the last piece again? It is a little challenging to hear all the conversation.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just wondering, administratively, I could imagine this is really hard because it could fall into that adverse weather condition category in one community, but not in another. If it's day to day, if the cold weather piece is day to day, then, it's hard to activate either the motel or the emergency cold shelter with that kind of turnaround. I guess I'm wondering how administratively you would handle a difference in temperature between, say, White River Junction and Burlington. Would different communities then have access to adverse weather conditions and others wouldn't?
So when we did this pre-pandemic, we used the location of our district office. So we have 12 of those. And then we used the NOAA forecast for that town to apply to the whole district office. And we had it up on our website. So saying if we had AUK and then by which locations met the threshold or didn't meet the threshold. So it is something that we are well versed in administering here in ESD. And I think it would be a lot on communication. How do we make sure that people know this as we move forward? Because it would be, transitioning to something that we hadn't done for a little bit.
So it's managed by the weather conditions at each district office. That's how it's. Yes.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. John?
The other thing I was going to just share, having worked as a mountain guide for 40+ years, when I bring clients outside for fun things, they're not unhoused here, but we work on forecasted weather here. And there's going to be fluctuations across the state, north and south and east and west here, clearly, especially things like wind chill. And so I don't know to what degree you can do better than that. It's your best piece of information here. Other than it's clearly going to, you're looking at actual temperatures here and wind chill factors as well. So I think that might be the best model we could potentially.
Good to not use just one location. for
Yeah,
this.
not just necessarily use one location, because between here and the Northeast Kingdom, we can have temperature fluctuations, as I shared with everyone here.
Yes.
That can just be what it is. It's just different geography. Latitude, elevation kinds of things.
So this, we're bringing back, or did we stop doing this? We're
Yes.
bringing it back.
Yes.
Okay. And this will be in the hotels. Just trying to get my head around the thing. And that's the assumption about 513 households.
Yes.
And that is that running December 1st, to March 30th?
Miranda?
I think in the past, it wasn't necessarily that we had, I feel like December 1st might not have been the date. And I would have to go and look and see where was the date that started when we were looking at the 87 days. As we know, we have, our temperatures have fluctuated, the weather has fluctuated. So I can look and see if it is December 1st or if it had started a little bit later.
Okay, so we'd like to know what the beginning and end dates are for this program. Thank you.
So that just.
Yep.
It was December 1st, 2026 through March 31st, 2027.
Okay. Great, thank you. Okay. Now we're at cold weather is the next one.
And these are emergency cold weather shelters for 1.3 million. We're currently supporting capacity for 167 individuals. We're hoping to expand to other communities in state fiscal year 27. It would be day-to-day weather dependent and community-based shelters. And rental assistance, 1.4 million. That would serve approximately 80 households. It's targeted at households experiencing homelessness with an average benefit of 14.8 thousand annually. The idea is households are paying 30 to 40% of their adjusted income for rent and utilities.
So, is this a new program? Yes.
Yes. Yes, I think again, to the discussion earlier, we want this to be more than just a sheltering effort, but really a housing effort and moving folks out of emergency housing. I think we really echo that sentiment of, well, we want to make sure we have a place for people to go. We want shelters to be brief and frequent, non-recurring. So I think rental assistance is a real key component of addressing this dynamic. Some of you may have heard the three-legged stool analogy. You need rental assistance, units, and services for some households to really help them attain and maintain housing. So this is a part of that program. And it would be a new baseline item for us.
And so how would this work? We have a program that we started a couple of years ago, which was an upstream eviction prevention, with tenant representation, where, the goal was if someone was threatened with eviction due to lack of payment of rent, that there was an attorney from legal aid that would work with usually attorneys from the property owners and landlords in order to resolve the dispute. And so, and then if it's resolved, then there would be sort of a moratorium for 12 months on whether they would be able to be evicted for non-payment. Again, it doesn't have anything to do with other for-cause outside of non-payment of rent. No-cause evictions are still a big deal, especially for people at the lower end of the economic spectrum. So how have the rules been set up for this? The tenant representation program, which again is an eviction prevention program, will run out of money at the end of September, and unless we, in our it's currently not on the schedule to be refunded yet. How will it work though? I mean, it's been a successful program in the two counties that it's in, keeping people in their homes, which is obviously homelessness prevention. How have the rules been set up for how this money would be used? I mean, it's 80 households roughly. Is it an eviction prevention program? Or is it someone who says, someone comes in and has to apply for it in a different way?
Yeah, it would not be set up the way that eviction prevention program is set up. It is targeted rental assistance. So think of a voucher. So regular monthly rental assistance for people who are exiting homelessness to help them address the rent burden that they would otherwise face in getting into units. Even some of the more affordable, VHIP units are still at a price that's hard for folks who are lower, Social Security, for instance, to attain. So this is rental assistance. I think, in the past, we've had some one-time funding to do what's considered a rapid rehousing program, which is 3 to 24 months of rental assistance. I think we recognize that due to federal pressures, we're seeing the need that sometimes you may have to go beyond 24 months, but the goal is that this still is a bridge to a permanent voucher. So it's not a one-time rental arrears program or specific eviction prevention. It is really targeted to folks who are trying to exit homelessness, but cannot afford a rental unit without rental assistance on not an ongoing basis, but again, on a bridge basis.
One of the major barriers, unless there is assistance like a rapid rehousing, is the focus on not just private apartments, but public apartments as well, is first month's, last month's security.
Mhm.
And is that what this would be used for? Because without that, then they can't even get in to be able to be in a position to pay rent.
Yeah, we have, in prior iterations of, again, that rapid rehousing program, we did allow for security deposit as an allowable cost. I will also just say this is not intended to replace like our HOP financial assistance, which is direct client-based financial assistance, which also does allow for security deposits. This really is that rental assistance, but again, we have allowed security deposit in the past, and I think we would follow probably those guidelines for this as well.
And this is roughly the same clientele. Actually, you're saying 30 to 40% of adjusted. HOP is for 30% less, right?
I would have to pull up the rental arrear guidance. HOP is, that financial assistance is short term, so it's 90 days or less, 3 months or less, whether that's
30% of the, I'm saying 30% of AMI is what people, HOP only works for people who would go up to 30% of AMI, is that right?
I would have to
Really
pull
low.
it up. But that also, I just want to clarify, that's short-term rental assistance, so it's not, whereas this is not short-term rental assistance, which is 90 days or less, whereas HOP has that requirement. So that's an important distinction when it comes to financial assistance.
So how long is this for? How long could one of the 80 household get this benefit?
What we would be working with is that households would have a housing plan, working with housing case managers. I think in the past, we had been able to see 1 or 2 years of assistance was enough to bridge to a voucher. I think we would monitor that. I think it could be 2 to 3 years. I think we would have some analysis that we're constantly doing to keep a pulse on the federal picture and help move folks onto those longer term options.
You're hoping that they will get Section 8 housing. This is like a bridge to Section 8 housing. Is that what?
For some folks, it would be. For some folks, it might be a bridge to, you know, they might be able to increase their income during this time and may no longer need it. Again, I think we would have individualized plans for households to make sure that this can be a bridge to what makes sense for them.
Just a clarification, they can have vouchers, they can have qualified for Section 8 vouchers, and this would be paying their 30% that they would need to pay rent, or is this for the people who don't have vouchers?
Right, this would be a voucher until they're able to hopefully get onto a permanent voucher. So it's a state-funded rental voucher.
It's not a Section 8.
It doesn't cover the 30% that's needed.
Right, which is
It's
what-
distinct.
Okay,
So that's what happens with the voucher now, right? It would operate the same way as a housing choice voucher to some extent in terms of what the household pays. Hopefully, they would be able to get onto another voucher.
we had in the past when there were voucher issues 10+ years ago when there was nothing but budgetary reconciliation, and we did a 12-month state-oriented voucher. This is different than that as well. So
Yes.
that's not federally funded.
That's correct. This would be in addition to that.
Thank you.
So one other question, because somebody else brought up HOP, is HOP has some stuff and this is a different program. But are you funding HOP in FY 27 at the same level you funded HOP in 26?
No, we're proposing approximately a $6 million increase to HOP to maintain some shelter investments that have been made this year or that we anticipate coming online.
Okay,
So
so this is where
that's-
that breakdown of HOP
Yes,
would
yeah.
be really helpful.
Yeah, I'll make sure you have the award summary.
It's
No, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, we'll make sure to send the award summary, which does identify which is one-time versus base funding and
Yeah. What is shelter services or direct services to clients and what is shelter operation?
yeah, you can take a look and then let me know what follow-up questions you have, and that way we can try to get you a format that works for you.
Okay, let's continue.
And then finally, enhanced case management for 1.3 million. Provide case management to as many households in shelter-like options as resources allow. Coordinate and standardize outreach and case management across the state and across programs. Standardize the workflow and supplement existing capacity.
So you mentioned earlier on, it said see, there was staff, but see the budget or whatever. So can you tell me how many new staff positions you are looking to have in this whole project? across the agency?
So we're not requesting any new positions. We have 21 existing limited service positions that have been funded with one-time money. We're requesting that those positions be funded in the base appropriation moving forward. And that portion of that would shift to be more focused on supporting the family shelters on location, and then we would remain to keep 9 positions to support the eligibility determinations for ESD.
I think I'd like to see a breakout of the 21 and what their position, you're proposing their positions are and what their job is going to be, maybe where they're located, because, and are they all filled now?
I'm going to grant whether the limited service positions are filled.
No, not all positions are filled.
Do you have any idea of these 21 which are filled? How many are filled?
I believe that we have 3 vacancies.
Okay, so 18 are filled and 3 vacancies. Okay.
May I go back and just answer a question that I realized I didn't answer for Representative Stevens regarding the HOT financial assistance eligibility? So it is folks who meet the HUD definition of homelessness and then have a household income, so literally homeless, or those who meet the other aspects of the definition are at risk of homelessness definition and have a household income of 50% AMI. And I can send you that in an email if that's helpful. Okay.
I mean, it's, the numbers shift everywhere. So and HOP was always, I mean, someday I'd like a chart to make sure that we have the numbers, because some places are 50%, extremely low is 30%. So thank you for the clarity.
Yes, thanks for the question.
Dave, you had a question earlier on that you wanted to. If your family
If there's
gets
time,
homeless, right?
I would,
It's not.
yeah, help me understand how a homeless person would get help. Who would they call? Who would they see, et cetera?
Sure, I think that folks have the ability to right now approach shelters directly and apply that way. Folks right now can call and access benefits through economic services. We also then in communities have lead agencies that help as a front door. When folks come in, if that's their point of entry, there's sort of an initial screening of like, do you need immediate services? So for instance, if that person is looking for shelter, there would be an immediate discussion of like, okay, let's explore what options we have in our community right now, help you get connected. And then let's come back and do a longer term assessment about like, what are your longer term housing goals? So I think those dynamics would, I think, still be in place where folks have the ability to approach a project directly, but then also leverage the housing navigators that we have in a community to help make sure they know what resources are available.
Okay. I can follow that. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
so the updated version is now on our website, if I'm correct? It has all the numbers. And the chart will get a little bit more of a breakout of the HOP shelter funding, and there's sort of a lot TBD here. I mean, you have concepts of plan, as it were, is to for medically vulnerable, for recovery centers, for families. So it feels like they're targeting the people that really are going to need our help. But there's still a lot to be determined in how we do all this, I guess. And Dave, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I'm just, we've already touched on it, but in my mind, I'm trying to decide, would it make more sense to put 1.3 million in case management into 21 state employees or into community-based organizations? And that's just something I wanted to ruminate on. I think there's pros and cons.
Yeah,
Sure.
sure.
The 1.3 million for case management is not for the 21 limited service positions. That's a separate
Is it
program.
community based?
Yes.
Thank you.
So that money would be going to community action partners, the 1.3 million to do that case management? Who's doing the case management?
You would work with community-based organizations. I don't think it would necessarily be potentially only one type of provider.
Okay. But the 1.3 million is going out into the community, not staying in your budget. Okay.
And just a follow-up, and the 21 positions are in the GA line, right? That is 2.7 something, and that the 500K is in the GA for housing, and the rest of it is for administration, and it's those positions. Am I right, Megan?
So, yes, and so the money is not in ESD budget for the limited service positions. It's not an appropriation. GA is a separate appropriation in our budget. So if you would limit our ups downs, it would be the first section, not the GA section. But on the table that we showed at the beginning of this presentation, it is in the GA line that is associated with ESD. And so that line has the 2.7 million in there, and 500,000 of that is for contracted hotels. And then the remaining is the administrative. And it's not the limited service position, it's also our contract that we are actually procuring for our call center.
As a result of all these proposed changes in your housing initiatives, are you going to be serving more people, fewer people, or the same number of people?
So I think one thing that I would just say is that this is a very dynamic group of folks who move in and out. And so sometimes the capacity does not necessarily reflect who's then coming in and out when you have like the bed nights. And I think in the table we gave you, you can see by which category. For some it's up, for some it's less, and then you can see those totals.
And I think you're talking about beds, but we're also talking about services and trying to get people out of homelessness. And we can't lose that piece of it. Is instead of just having a room for someone to sleep in, we want to move them out.
Right, so exactly, that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I probably am asking the question wrong. Because we do want to move people out, which means you could have a whole lot of people come through, so there's the flow of it. I think what I'm really asking about in my question is about capacity on any one night.
I think like that graph shows in the beginning, it's, I think, a little bit more moving forward. It's a little bit more.
We have capacity to serve on one night.
Right, but the whole initiative is to change how we do things and change how folks respond, communities respond, and make sure we're doing better and creating a system that makes people move through the system and improves conditions all around. But I think if you're asking on, the beds, it's that first graph, it shows, it's just they're served differently.
And so when you talk about our goal is, so what sort of metrics do you have in place to measure the success of what you're doing? How will you know?
That's in a different PowerPoint. Let me.
We like to ask these sort of accountability questions about how do we know our money's going to the right thing and it's being used effectively.
Do you have it off top of mind, but I
We
think.
have 5 specific metrics that we identified overall, high-level macro metrics. One was the number of people engaged with case management that we want to track. Obviously, we want that to increase. Another was the number of the average days that somebody's in shelter or shelter-like option. Hotel. We obviously want to help people move through the system. That's an important one to track. We want to continue to track the number of deaths in hotel, which unfortunately, since 2020 has been 153. We obviously want that to decline and track deaths who are sheltered and unsheltered. And then Nellie took back here, my memory, tracking the number of people that move into permanent housing solution, obviously we want that to increase. And then as we've talked through with HHS, another metric that they have requested and we certainly are supportive of is number of people that re-enter.
Yes, that's great. So it'd be great if you could send us that. Looks like you actually have a PowerPoint or a slide. That would be great to have. The tracking the number of deaths, well, you're gonna have fewer hotel rooms, so that should go down anyway, but that sort of leads me to wonder about maybe fewer deaths of people that aren't in shelters that didn't make it to shelters. Are you track any of that?
We work with the Department of Health to track that as best as we can. It's certainly not to the level that we see in hotel.
Well, I'm sure you can't as much, but yeah, I would hope we'd be keeping an eye on that as well.
And we've also worked with Lilly and partners and shelter providers are also now tracking the number of deaths in shelter, which obviously you can imagine is significant.
I think about that person who was trying to walk through shelter and was so far away, so this will help like eliminate those. So
Do we know what the total dollar amount is of the package, the presentation?
that if that we got.
Yeah, that's on the second slide, I
So
think.
that, I think Autumn has now posted the new,
Yeah.
Thank you.
so there's a budget components on page 2 or 3, Dave.
Thank you.
It looks like it's 82.6 million for FY 27.
So I want to clarify that that's including existing hot budget. So.
Yeah.
So.
I know it's not all new money.
Yeah,
So
so.
we're not freaking out about that. But I think it's about the same amount as H91 was.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
dressed up.
And this year, it's proposed to be 77 million. And next year it's 82. You know, the usual concern about the base, the more you add to the base, the more ongoing expenses we have. But I also understand why you're doing it, but it's part of the challenge. Okay. Any other questions for anybody? Anything else you guys want to let us know before we let you go?
It's helpful. Thank you.
It's very
Thank you
helpful. We
so much.
appreciate your time and we'll look forward to getting a few more things from you.
Fantastic, thank you.
So committee, let's see where we are here.
Just a quick question. Someone from.
Back at 1 o'clock with the VOSHA review board.